now that you've learned about minerals, we're going to take a look at the different types of rocks. And so a rock is made up of mostly minerals. So they can range in size from microscopic, so that means super small that you would need like a microscope to see, or they can be very large, and that's the minerals, these mineral size. They can be made up of one or more type of minerals, and it's very common for it to be many rocks, or a rock to be a mixture of many different minerals. Rock names are based on the minerals that they are made up from and the way those minerals come together. So different minerals will form under different environmental conditions. We kind of learned about that last chapter. And so this gives us clues about the conditions in which the rock formed. So there are three main categories of rocks. We have igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. And we'll go into more detail about each of these types of rocks in the next 3 videos, but we'll have a brief overview right now. So igneous rocks form when magma or lava cools. Sedimentary rocks form when sediments are compacted and cemented together. These sediments, remember sediment means pieces of rocks. Those pieces can be gravel, sand, silt, or clay, and they often have pieces of other rocks in them, and they can form from precipitates. And these types of precipitates are just like the precipitates from last chapter, where the water dissolves the mineral. And then that water evaporates. The last type of rock is metamorphic rocks, and this is when an existing rock is changed by heat and or pressure. The minerals change, but they do not melt. So their crystals will rearrange. Oops, sorry. So each of these pictures here, we have lava cooling, so this would give us igneous rocks. Here would be your sedimentary rock example, and lastly down on the bottom would be your metamorphic rock example. And let's see, this particular picture shows us sandstone. That's not a very good color. And this last one is referred to as something called mica schist. And so, like I said, the following videos will go into more detail about each of these 3 types of rocks. But what we're going to focus on is that all rocks can change. And it is an extremely slow process to change rock types. And this process is described in something called the rock cycle. So the rock cycle describes each of the main types of rocks and how they change. And it also describes how they form. So there is no beginning or an end because a cycle is like a circle. So there is no beginning and there is no ending. And when we say it's a very slow process, we're looking at hundreds to millions of years in order to change a rock. And it would just depend on the conditions that the rock is in. So there's kind of 3 main processes to the rock cycle. The first is referred to as cooling and forming crystals. So deep within Earth, temperatures can get hot enough to melt rock. When this happens, we form magma. That magma will eventually cool, and this allows crystals to form. If the cooling process is a slow process, we will see large crystals form. And by large, I mean big enough to see without a microscope. If it is a fast cooling process, the crystals will be very small and you would need a microscope in order to see them. Your second process is called weathering and erosion. And wind, water, ice, plants, and animals all have the ability to wear or break rocks down. The larger rocks can be broken into smaller pieces, and those smaller pieces are what we refer to as sediments. Then water, wind, and glaciers can carry these pieces of rock from place to place. And when the wind, the water, or the glaciers stop moving, those sediments get deposited. So being deposited means a process by which sediments are dropped by wind, water, or ice. And the ice is referring to the glacier. So then once a sediment gets deposited, they will get compacted or squeezed together. And then they will get cemented together. And again, this process can take hundreds to thousands of years. Your third process of the rock cycle is called metamorphism. And metamorphism literally means to change form. And so if a rock is exposed to extreme or very high heat and a lot of pressure, the rock will change. It is very important to understand that the rock itself does not melt. It might begin to melt, but it will not melt the whole way. And so this causes the rock to have a new mineral composition and or texture. So this is just your brief view of the rock cycle, or the three types of rock, and a little more detail about the rock cycle. And in our next video, we'll start to take a look at igneous rocks.